So in this video, after having already touched on some of the bigger names in North American Counter-Strike Global Offensive, such as Cloud9 and Liquid and CLG, I wanted to take this time to maybe point out some other teams or players that we should at least keep an eye on in their development to see if maybe we might have some new talent rising up in the NA scene. Obviously, we've consistently been talking about this void that was left behind at the top of NA outside of Cloud9, who remained kind of unaffected, after iBuyPower and Torch and some of these other players were exiled from the scene. We've now had this void, or this lack of talent, so to speak, that's now being filled by up and coming players and teams. And I wanted to see if I could at least maybe point in the direction of some teams and players that we could potentially see rise up based on what we've seen recently. Now, with all of these teams and players that I'm going to talk about, while some of these players have had some experience in international CSGO, all the teams as a whole have not. So as a starting five, none of these teams have really had any experience playing against European teams or teams from another country, and thus the data is very limited. There isn't much there. There really isn't any reason to suspect that they are going to be international contenders at this point in time. If they were to be, it would take quite a long time. But maybe some of these players might be people that we can look at in the future for NA and building some bigger teams. And just maybe with a lot more time and practice and preparation and more events attended, maybe these teams as a five can develop into something that will eventually start challenging some of these other teams that I've talked about, as they already have started to, at least in online play. The first team I'll talk about is Mythic, also known as now Luminosity. That was a very recent pickup by them. Now on this team you have Anger, who I guess I wouldn't really call him a controversial character, but there's definitely some people who feel he's a very, very good player, and then there's some people who feel that he's overrated or not quite as good as the fans and such believe that he is. Now, it is true that he has had some poor performances in his career. So at the Season 17 ESEA LAN, when he was playing with Denial, which is now Liquid, he did have a very poor showing at that event. He's also had some instances where he's had some poor showings overseas with teams like Curse, and even some of the events he played with iBuyPower, he did have a tough time, it seemed. But he's also had some really good events. So at the Season 15 ESEA LAN with iBuyPower, when they were beating Titan that back-to-back best-of-3, he actually played quite well in this series, and he played quite well that entire event that iBuyPower was able to get a first-place finish. Even when he was filling in basically for Complexity at the Season 16 ESEA LAN, and they were playing against teams like Virtus Pro and NIP, while he wasn't the star of the team at this particular event, like Nothing was clearly the star of that series against Virtus Pro, he was probably second or third place fragging in that series, and then he had a couple of good maps against NIP as well. So it's not as if he had a terrible performance at every event he's attended. He's had some good showings at times, but yes, he has had some poor showings. Now, I've heard these crazy thoughts about how part of the reason why he played so poorly at times was because he was having vision issues and didn't buckle down and get glasses or something like that. I have no clue how true this is or not. That's just something I randomly read on Twitter and something that I think he commented on. But the point is Anger does have a lot of experience. He has played at a professional level for a very long time. He has played against elite level teams. He at least knows what they look like and how they can play, and he does add some experience to this team, and maybe he can, if he can kind of get sustainable and kind of get back to that level where he was playing pretty well in some of these ESEA LAN events, then maybe he could be a very good player to keep looking at going forward. He's definitely been looking more impressive online in the most recent months in comparison to how he was maybe earlier in 2014, so maybe there is something there. They also just recently picked up Frost, which is another guy in North America who has quite a lot of experience. He used to play for Quantic back in that team that was taking second place, I think, at the season... I'm going to get this wrong probably. It was either Season 13 or Season 14 ESEA LAN. I think it was 13 when they took second place because they had beaten Very Games but lost the NIP in the finals, something like that. And they also had some decent showings overseas as well. And Frost was a member of this team. He was their opper, and I think he can add an op to this team. I know Flom has kind of been the more primary opper for this team as of late, who used to be a rifler and just kind of transitioned into a main opping role with this particular lineup. but he also adds a lot of experience and knowledge to the team as well. Then you have Hades, who is the in-game leader for the team. He has led a couple of teams out of amateur divisions to the invite level, but then for some reason always got removed from the team once they hit the professional level. Not really sure what that's about. There's some type of drama or personal issues that I'm unaware of, but he has proven to be a pretty capable player, and he's their in-game leader, so we'll see how he can lead this team. And then Lex is the last guy I haven't mentioned besides Flom, who had a little bit of experience at professional level of Counter-Strike, but just kind of recently got on this team and recently got on a team that was actually contending for a playoff spot. So I know he came from Call of Duty as a PC player in Call of Duty before coming to Counter-Strike, and so it seems like he's finally now getting to a level where he can kind of contend with some of the top NA teams. And then the same kind of goes with Flom, who also floated around some professional teams in Counter-Strike Go, but never was really on a team that could contend for a playoff spot or be big up until kind of this lineup. Now, this lineup thus far, without Frost, had played at ClutchCon, and they made it out of group play into the quarterfinals, and they lost to Cloud9 2-0 in the series. They had a close map on Cash against Cloud9, but other than that, I mean, they were kind of dealt with by Cloud9, and that was kind of expected, to be quite honest. However, just recently, they qualified for SEVOLAN after beating Elevate in a really close 2-1 series in the lower bracket. This was after they had gotten upset kind of by Denial in the upper bracket, and so now they're going to get their chance basically to compete against some of the top North American teams at a LAN event as a 5. And at this will hopefully generate us some data on how good this team really can be, at least within the North American scene, before we can even begin to talk about their potential for being a team that will play against Europeans or something like that. And they also are technically still in the running for ESEA LAN. They have an 8-6 record as I make this video. So they're 4th place right now in the standings. Now, granted, this is going to be interesting because right now there's probably 3 or 4 teams fighting for 2 spots on the bottom 2 of ESEA right now. There's a lot of teams that have like an 8-6 or 8-4 or 7-5 record, so it's very, very close right now as far as qualifying for ESEA LAN, but maybe I'll talk about that in a later video once that kind of gets solidified. But they're still in the running right now, so they're going to have some chances to try to prove themselves at least within NA coming up very soon at some of these LAN events. At SEVOLAN for sure, and if they can qualify for ESEA, they'll get a shot there, and maybe get to play against some European teams too if they make it to that Season 18 ESEA event. And then we'll just have to kind of see how they perform and if they have any potential or not, because right now there's just no data. There's really no way to know. They've at least beaten a good North American team here or there, or challenged some of them in online play, so we'll just have to see what happens. Now, next up is Denial eSports. This is the other team besides Luminosity and then CLG and Cloud9 who just recently qualified for the SEVOLAN event. So this means that, like I was saying with Luminosity, this will be their chance as a 5 to start challenging some of these top NA teams and see how good they really are. Now, with this team, they did, with some type of roster, come to ClutchCon, and they didn't make it out of group play. They beat Kaboom originally on Inferno, and then I think they lost to Elevate on a map, and they beat the other team in the group, and there was this crazy tiebreaker, and then they had to replay Kaboom on Inferno again for this weird tiebreaker situation that didn't really make any sense, and they lost that, and so they got eliminated in group play. After this, Relic's one of their big fraggers, leads the team. He's now playing for SKDC. I think Slimmy, their in-game leader, and their main opera at the time, also kind of stepped away from the team. And now I'm not really sure who's leading this team, but they still have Flowstick, Valens, and Unimatic. Then they picked up Sanksington, which is a guy who did play some top-level NA 1.6 within the 1.6 NA scene. He wasn't on like a crazy good team, but he at least played, against those teams in online play. But in CSGO, I think he filled in a little bit for Mousebaz, which is now CLG, a couple of seasons ago, kind of as like a 6-man when they needed a sub. But other than that, he's never really started on a professional CSGO team. So basically no data on this guy whatsoever other than what we're seeing recently in online play. Same thing can be said about Professor Chaos, their other new player. Never heard of this guy before he joined this team, if I'm honest. He's never really played any type of elite or pro level NA Counter-Strike until now. So no data on this guy really either. Essentially, there's really nothing I could tell you about this team or conclude about this team whatsoever, because with Sanksington and Professor Chaos, I've never really even seen these guys play at a Counter-Strike Global Offensive LAN. They may have played some local stuff or some smaller events within the NA scene that I don't know about, but they certainly haven't played at any of the bigger events. like the ESCA events, like the CEVO events, like, you know, just, you know, events where they're playing against elite level NA teams, or not really elite, but top level NA teams, or something to that effect. So basically, no real clue. But they did qualify for CEVO LAN, so we're going to get a chance to see some of these players play in a big LAN against, you know, top NA teams for the first time, and we'll just have to see how well they do, because I know that, at least from what I've been reading and listening to chat and in forums and different things like that, there's a lot of hype around this Professor Chaos guy and Sanctum and how well they've been playing recently. So I'm curious to see if they can bring it on LAN against some of these top NA teams, and maybe if they can, these are some players we can start looking at. As a 5, I don't really see them competing against European teams whatsoever, but maybe some of these players can prove themselves to be pretty worthy. I know Flosic has a lot of experience and has been kind of around the scene for a very long time. Unamatic, I know, used to play Counter-Strike Source as a very young kid, and he's still very young. So, once again, no real data here. I'm just trying to say maybe this is a team we can at least look at in some future and soon to come NA LAN events, and then from there we can try to see how good they actually are. And the last team I wanted to talk about is Elevate, who unfortunately did not qualify for CEVO LAN, but I still wanted to talk about them just because it was kind of close. I mean, they really just barely didn't make the event, and they've also had some good showings and some other stuff, and they have some players I think we should keep an eye on at the very least. So the way this team gets some notoriety is because they upset CLG at ClutchCon in a 2-1 series. They just played really, really well. They beat CLG on Dust 2, which was kind of like CLG's trademark map. Remember, this is the map they had just beaten LDLC on at Aspen X Games. Then they just crushed them in the third map, losing map 2. I can't remember what map 2 was, but then they went on to map 3, which I believe was like DE season or something like that, and just kind of absolutely mowed over CLG, which, to be fair, is probably a map that they weren't very well prepped on, so that's probably led to it. But this is still important because I think CLG was definitely the favorite. There's no question about it. And so for Elevate to get the win, that was kind of a big step. And a lot of their players looked really sharp and really polished, especially for some guys who are young and inexperienced. They looked really good. And so it's kind of showing us that maybe this team, or at least some of their players, definitely has some potential going down the line. After this, they also made it to the finals of the North American Katowice qualifier. So this is for a chance to go over, because Liquid and Cloud9 got direct invites to the offline qualifier, so there was, you know, a bunch of NA teams fighting for that third spot, and they made it to the finals to play CLG once again. So there's a bit of a rivalry that's developed between CLG and Elevate here recently, and they're very interesting to watch because all the games are so very close. So in this series, it was 2-1 in favor of CLG. They basically just got beat 2-1. Like, CLG got a win on Dust 2 against them, and they also got a win on Cache, which is kind of one of their other strong maps, and that's how they won. I think Elevate won Nuke in map 2 or something. So CLG kind of gets some revenge and gets a spot to go to the NA Katowice qualifiers offline. But Elevate was really close. I mean, it was a pretty competitive series, and they almost were the other NA team going to Katowice instead of CLG. So this is still a team, though they didn't quite make it, to at least keep an eye on. So far, to make CEVO LAN, they did lose to CLG again in the upper bracket. They pretty much they picked poorly in the banning phase. They picked Overpass, their map, a map they really weren't very good on. So if you're going to pick a map, it should be like a map you feel very confident on, you should be very good on. I guess they were just trying to catch CLG off guard when they got blown out 16-6, even though they picked that map. And then they had lost a close game on Mirage, which was CLG's pick early in their series. So they lose that. They go into the lower bracket, and then they lost out to Luminosity, this team I talked about earlier with Anger and all those guys, in a pretty close 2-1 series, and that's how they missed out on CEVO LAN. In fact, it was really a nail-biting series. I think 2 of the maps were 16-14 games, so it was definitely a really close series. Now, they're still in the running for ESCA LAN at this point in time. They have 8-4 record, so they're ranked up there in the top 4 for sure in the ESCA standings. They have some good wins against CLG on Inferno, against Liquid on Mirage, which that is kind of a weak map for Liquid. They have a win against Denial on Cache and a win against Cloud9 on Dust 2, which is very recent. So they're competing against some of these top North American teams already, at least in online play. On LAN, they beat CLG, and their players were looking pretty much just as sharp on LAN as they do online. I really think Elevate is probably even better. I think Elevate's better than Denial, to be honest. I know Denial got the spot for Sivoland and Elevate did not, but I really do think Elevate's definitely a better team than Denial and well more, definitely way more better put together. If that makes any sense. I can't talk apparently. But anyway, so I think Elevate, even though they didn't qualify for Sivoland, they were very close to going to Katowice. They upset CLG at ClutchCon. They're in the running for ESC Atlanta. I'm pretty sure they'll get that spot as long as they just kind of stick where they're at. They've already gotten some big wins against some of the other top teams that are competing for land spots. So it seems like they've kind of done the harder part of the job already to get a spot. They just need to kind of make sure they don't make any mistakes in these last few matches of the season. They should get a spot there. When I'm looking at this team, XP3 and Storm are like kind of the veterans on the team. They've been around with this team for several seasons of play. There were instances where they didn't quite qualify for ESC Land, but came in as a stand-in when some other teams couldn't make it, and they would actually make some noise and actually beat some NA teams and get like a decent ranking within all of the NA teams at the event, but they never really challenged any European teams. I know they had some close games against Navi at the Iron Gaming event when XP3 and Storm were still on the team, but that was back when they had, Warden and some of those other guys on the team. Since then, they've picked up kind of 3 players. One was Rush, who they actually used at the Season 17 ESC LAN event, which is when they got eliminated by Denial in the lower bracket, which is now Liquid, of course. And he's kind of floated around the invite team for a while. He's never really been super spectacular, but he seems to be a lot better on this Elevate team than what I remember him being on the past when he played with teams like Monomaniacs and such. When he was like kind of first getting into pro NACS. And then they picked up Elige, who's this 17-year-old guy who hasn't played any professional CS up until he played for Elevate just a few months ago. And he looks really good. I mean, he's 17, he's young, he's new to the scene. This is kind of one of the guys that we can be looking at to develop, since he's so young, into maybe a player that NA can rely on in the future to kind of beat some talent that they can use against some of the top teams in the world. Not really sure. It's way too early to really heavily and confidently conclude that, but I think just based on watching him play, like his first big LAN event against top NA teams was actually ClutchCon back in January. So, I mean, for his first, I mean, he's played some local and smaller LANs, but for his first like big LAN where he's playing against teams like CLG and stuff like that, and the LAN environment, he actually performed just as well on LAN as he does online. He's statistically, I think, either the best player on this team or the second best player on this team, and this is definitely a kid to look out for going forward for NA Counter-Strike, to either maybe with this team, if they can stick together and really work hard and get some better prep and get more consistent, be able to qualify for these LANs and consistently challenge these top teams in situations where it really matters, not regular season best of ones, but in best of threes where you're trying to qualify for a LAN spot. If they can just pick it up a little bit, the team as a whole could eventually be very good for NA. I think even as of right now, I would say they're definitely a top 5 NA team, if not top 4 somewhere, if not like 4th place or 3rd place or something like that, as far as talent in NA. And then definitely this Elige kid, someone to keep an eye on. Same could be said about Roka. He's 19 years old, if I'm not mistaken. He was kind of getting some notoriety at the very end of Counter-Strike Source back in 2012 when he attended the last ever ESCA LAN, or last ever North American LAN, maybe even the last CSS LAN period, with a team called Frag Machines, who took 2nd place to Dynamic at the event. He looked really good in this event. He had looked well online for a long time in that game, and he proved himself on LAN at this ESCA Counter-Strike Source LAN. And CSGO, he's had some brief stints at the pro level with teams like Area 51 and then some other little teams, but he never really had like it seemed like he never really had like a stable team that was actually competing for a top spot in NA or competing for LAN attendance, or that was that serious. And so this seems to be his first really stable and serious professional CSGO team, and he's played very well. Much like Elige, he's a young kid who seems to show some talent. He always had a reputation from the Counter-Strike Source days as being like a really heavy aimer, and he's played really well on this team in all their online stuff and at ClutchCon and some of the stuff that they've played in recently. So I think for sure Roka and Elige are 2 players to keep a huge eye on. Rush is also pretty young. I think he maybe be 20 or something like that, so maybe he can develop a bit as well. And maybe as a team, this team could be, as a 5, a good team going forward to challenge some of these top NA teams. or maybe at least some of these players like Elysian Roca and such can eventually maybe be built into a top team for NA. But these are at least some teams and some players to keep eyes on. There's obviously also some free agents out there that you should keep your eyes on. I don't think I need to really go into any detail about Skadoodle and Hiko, who are currently still free agents. We all know that those guys are very good and can be part of a top NA team, so there's no real need to shed any light on those guys. I think Desi is also another really good free agent that's out there. I'm not really sure what's going on. I know he had a trial period with Luminosity before they picked up Frost. He also was playing with Torqued after that whole banning situation took place. He was part of that Torqued pug that played at ClutchCon, and he played very well at this event. Even though they got eliminated in the quarterfinals to Liquid, he was fragging very well throughout the entire event. And just to tell you a little bit about this guy, he actually played on the same Juma's lineup that Shroud did way back, I think, in the Season 16 ESEA LAN event. This is back when it was like Desi, Shroud, Urakanji, Miniker, and D-Born. And they pretty much got annihilated in the event. They got 4-0'd because they played, I think, Navi first and got 2-0'd by Navi, and then they played Nip and got 2-0'd, and that's how they got eliminated from the tournament. But none of the players looked really that amazing in this event, to be honest. But Shroud still got picked up by Cloud9 because he at least didn't do horrible, and he already had a good reputation. But Desi actually performed better than him at this particular LAN event, at least in my eyes. When I was watching them play, it seemed like Desi was playing a little bit better. Maybe not like loads better or anything, but he seemed to play either just as good as Shroud, if not better than Shroud, at this particular LAN event. Not only that, but throughout the entire regular season within the NA scene, Desi seemed to be performing a bit better than Shroud. Yet Shroud was the one who got picked up. Of course, he had the better reputation and everything like that, as far as like having this reputation of being a solid aimer and an up-and-coming young guy. And so he was the one that Cloud9 took a gamble on. It winds up paying off, so there's no hard feelings there. I'm just saying that Desi was also showing some potential at this exact same time period. And then when he got picked up by iBuyPower to fill in for DreamHack Winter 14 and such later on, like Nitro did. Once again, this is a team where Desi was performing just about as good as Nitro was at DreamHack Winter 14, and leading up to preparations for this event, he seemed to be playing just as good. Yet Nitro's the one who has like the better reputation and kind of sticks with iBuyPower for the Season 17 LAN event, and now he has just this really high regard as having a lot of potential and being a really good player, and now he's with Liquid and he's kind of like one of their main fraggers. But I thought Desi was, performing just as well with iBuyPower as Nitro was in most of their preparations and even at the main event itself. Nitro may have been a bit better, and maybe he does have a bit more potential. I'm not really sure. We'll have to see how it plays out. But the only point I'm trying to get at is it seems as though when some of these other NA players have gotten chances, it seems like Desi has not, even though he's performed just as well as some of these other guys have who have gotten shots on top teams. Now, I'm not really sure what happened with Luminosity in that trial period he had with them. I don't know if there's like something about his attitude that people don't like. I know from talking to him personally and myself at some events, he can kind of seem, a bit overconfident or a bit, I wouldn't say big-headed, but he definitely is very confident that he's one of the top players in NA. And so I don't know if people take that as just being too arrogant, and so they don't want to deal with that type of attitude. But at the same time, if you want to be the best, you have to think that you can be. So I guess there's this fine line between arrogance and what people can handle as far as your arrogance level, and then confidence and being confident that you can be good and be an asset to a team. So I don't know if that has something to do with it, if it's like this attitude or personality conflict he has with teams that he tries out for. But as a fragger and the skill set that he brings, I think that at certain times he's shown just as good of skill as some of these other guys who have gotten chances on big teams, and I think he's still a good free agent out there. I kind of spent a bit more time than I thought I would about him personally, but I just feel like some people miss those facts about him. But like I said, maybe there's just something I'm not aware of that causes him to have issues joining these top teams. So I think he's still a free agent out there, though, to think about. So that's what I'm kind of left with. I know there's some other NA teams out there that you could talk about that are still playing in the professional CSGO scene, but in all honesty, I'm not really confident in them really challenging for like a top 4 spot in NA. And then because of that, I don't really know if they'll ever be like an international team or a team that ever competes for NA in international tournaments. It doesn't seem like they will be. It seems like I've pretty much named every free agent and player or team that really kind of means anything in NA right now, to be honest, as far as being like the top of NA and maybe one day competing against European teams. I know SKDC has some talent on that team with some of their players, but I also think that that team is just built poorly as far as the players they have for certain roles. And I just, like, for example, they have JDM as their main opera, but they also have Virtus, who is most effective as an opera. And they're two different kinds of styles of opera, so I know you can run double op setups, but it seems like they struggle to be able to even get to a point where they can afford to do that. And then even when they can, it seems like they struggle to be able to consistently afford to run that type of setup. So it seems like more often than not, Virtus or something has resorted to using a rifle. And I just think that he's a much better main opper. So it just seems like maybe they have trouble coexisting on the same team, since they both need to be primary oppers for a team they're going to play for. And I know they have Relics and Dumore, who are kind of some guys that have some potential. So maybe eventually they turn things around and become a decent team in NA. But as of right now, it seems like they're struggling. Now, I know a lot of the reason why they're struggling in standings is because they have a lot of forfeit losses in the SCA, which adds to the weight of them trying to qualify for LAN. At this point, they're not going to be able to qualify with their record. But I know part of that comes from forfeits, but yeah, I don't know. They just don't seem really well put together. And I think I've pretty much talked about every team in pro CSGO that matters at this point. If I didn't, sorry if you feel that I missed somebody. I may have missed some free agents I'm just not thinking about right now, but I think I've hit all the free agents that aren't banned or whatever. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I hope this at least helps you maybe. I wasn't really trying to argue that these players or teams were going to be, NA's next best teams or players, or they were going to be NA's next rising stars to compete internationally. But at the very least, these are some of the other teams and players that are competing at the top of NA, that are fighting for its top spots within the NA scene, and maybe at some point they develop into teams, or maybe some of these players eventually develop into talents that we could see in top NA teams competing internationally. Now, it's tough, though, because it seems like NA teams are having a tough time dominating within their own region, much less trying to compete against European teams. So maybe that's an issue, is that we don't even have a team in NA that can clearly be the top of NA, much less competing against Europeans. Or you can take it from a different approach and just say that, at the top of NA, the top 4 or 5 or 6 teams are very tight, and they actually do compete against each other very well. So maybe you can take that as a sign that there is more talent growing in the North American scene. So you can kind of take it either way, but hopefully this at least gives you some insight and some thoughts about some of those other teams and players out there in North America that I haven't dedicated a full video to. Thanks.